Welcome to Live at the League. I'm Emily Kalashewski, Assistant Director of Member Experience and Learning here at the Michigan Municipal League. We've got several important legislative items moving right now, and we'll walk through what they mean for communities as we close out the year. Here's what we'll be covering today: the latest movement on economic development packages, what the new transparency law sets up for next session, early signals on property tax reform, and the push to wrap up sunset extensions before year end. If you're watching live, feel free to drop your questions in the chat or Q&A box. We'll answer as many as we can throughout the show. Let's jump right in. So first, Dave, to start, the governor recently signed transparency legislation related to legislatively directed spending. This creates a new baseline for how future legislative negotiations may unfold. Can you recap what this legislation does and its implications for us?
Yeah, so the governor signed last month what are now Public Acts 32 and 33. And so those are really intended to make changes to the way the budget process unfolds in terms of being just more transparent and accountable. And so the way that that works is by making lawmaker requested funding available online no less than 45 days before a final vote. And so that's really a pretty big departure from how prior budget conversations would go. So frankly, you would have a list of projects that are perhaps made available to other lawmakers hours or even minutes before they're expected to vote on something. But we have this multi-billion-dollar budget, and so everything is ultimately wrapped up into that one bill. And so it's essentially impossible to actually review everything that's going to be voted on. And so with this, there should be some time for lawmakers and the press, and frankly, anyone interested in taking a look on what lawmakers might be proposing or requesting in terms of funding for their districts or other projects, um, and just give additional time. I'll tell you that it was quite controversial. So Speaker Hall, this has been a priority for him for quite some time, and he really kicked things off wanting 90 days before a final vote could be done. That individual lawmakers would have to have their spending requests available. The Senate back in October introduced their own proposal at 10 days, so quite a difference there. And ultimately, this 45-day period was reached. The end did have overwhelming bipartisan support, but it did take us a little while to get there. This was all part of like a big part of the agreement from the last budget, right? The Senate agreed to come to the table and have a further conversation about this. And the reason it became so controversial is because Speaker Hall said we in the House are essentially not going to move any Senate bills whatsoever until this is figured out. And he's held true to that. So there has been very little policy that has actually moved through the House in terms of Senate bills as of late. But with this compromise reached, there are several things, a couple of which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, that I know the House is looking to take on before the end of the year and certainly going into next year. So just a reminder for everybody, Michigan has a 2-year legislative cycle. We are only entering the halfway point of this legislative cycle. So all of the bills that are currently floating around right now will still be around for next year as well. And so we do expect with this compromise being reached, a lot more activity legislatively in the coming year. And then obviously, as we ramp up for further budget negotiations, likely in April and May, you're going to see this new metric put in place where these spending items have to be available for review online for everybody at least 45 days before they take that final vote.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Dave, because I cringed a little when I said next session in the intro, but we're in the same session right now. It runs 25 through 26. So I do think that's an important distinction to make that this year, December looks a little different for all of you because we're not closing out a legislative session and maybe it's a little quieter, hopefully. All right, thanks, Dave. We next want to take a look at the economic development packages moving through the Senate and the role they may play in setting up future legislative progress. Jen, walk us through where things stand there and what communities should be watching.
Thanks, Emily. So after the budget was passed, there was a lot of talk on a new economic development deal being part of that budget agreement, that they would come to terms with something to replace the Strategic Outreach and Attraction Fund. So SOAR that we've talked about, was a big Priority of the governors previously. It's had its challenges, I think, with both sides of the aisle and both chambers. So they've both been working on replacement bills. So the Senate introduced more jobs for Michigan. This is Senate Bill 472 and 473. And it's really taking what they called a layered approach to a payroll tax-based economic development incentive. It has stricter eligibility criteria than the House's package. And the House package is House Bill 5292 and 5293. So those are both working through, their individual chambers right now. Not necessarily anything's going to be done before the end of this year, but I think they'll pick up next year right at the beginning and looking to do this. I know I've had a lot of members also reach out about back in early November, one chamber introduced bills to abolish the MEDC. And while there's been a lot of talk around that, just to let folks know, we don't think the MEDC will be going away. It could be renamed in a new administration. Different tools or programs could be put under different places. But the MEDC and the role that the MEDC plays, whether it's called something different or it's still called the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, will still be around in some form or fashion with its programs into the new year and then the new session in 2027.
Thanks, Jen. Let's shift to sunset extensions. There's urgency to move certain economic development incentives before year end. Can you share the latest on that and what the timeline might look like?
Yeah, so PA 210 and PA 255, we have the Commercial Redevelopment Act and the Commercial Rehabilitation Act. They both sunset on December 31st of this year. Last Tuesday, the Senate introduced bills, Senate Bill 721 and Senate Bill 722. They immediately had a hearing later that day in the Senate Reg Reform Committee. Those bills are back up for committee hearing tomorrow. We anticipate those bills will be voted out. Those two bills extend the sunset for 10 years, so to 2035. And then last Tuesday, we also had two bills dropped in the House, 5305 and 5306. Those only sunset extend it for 5 years, so to 2030. We are working to see if we can get the House versions to 2035 as well. But those are up in committee tomorrow in the House Finance Committee tomorrow morning. And we anticipate there'll be a hearing and a vote tomorrow. So we have bills in both chambers that will be moving and anticipate getting those done before the end of the year. Now, for some reason, they get stalled. Treasury has assured us that any existing certificates would not be have an issue, and any certificates that you're looking to do in early 2026, because they don't take effective date until the end of the year, as long as we get this done again right in the beginning, that those should all be fine. But we are working and pushing and have a lot of other folks pushing to get this legislation done as soon as possible, so before they depart and tap out for 2025.
Thanks, Jen. Good update. We have had a question come in through the chat that I'm going to direct to Harrisana because it's one of her issues. Harrisana, any updates on trial court funding reforms?
Yes. So a couple of weeks ago, we did have a joint hearing between both the House and the Senate on the initial report that was created by the Michigan Judicial Council. At that time, we had stakeholders come in and talk about the overall report and some of the proposals that were put together to really transition the local funding model to a state centralized model, which would adjust how our courts are funded, particularly gathering funding from the local level, taking that to the state and having the state fully responsible via Michigan Treasury of remitting what's necessary for local governments to operate the courts. The league has been deeply involved in this conversation since the Trial Court Funding Commission in 2018 and 2019. And so we have been consistent in our perspective that, yes, we find it necessary and appropriate to decouple the cost on defendants to fund the courts from the administration of justice. However, we do recognize that different communities have different needs. those funding needs look different, and we retain that that is our prerogative as local government or local control to administer that. So the league, along with the Michigan Township Associations, our partners in law enforcement, all together penned a letter in opposition of the initial recommendation, saying that, while we've been at the table, while we participated through, the advocacy of our members, the participation of our members in work groups, which we deeply appreciate, right now we are not in a place where we can support the proposal that's been put forward. So right now, we are in the position where legislators are now starting to finally digest that report. We can anticipate that there are going to be conversations of legislation being drafted to match those recommendations, but there still are a lot of questions, particularly what is the ongoing obligation for the state? It's unclear what that number exactly might be, because while we do bring in significant revenue through the local courts, there is the expectation as well as the necessity that the state is going to have to fund whatever is made up in the difference, and that is going to be an ongoing obligation. So things that we're looking closely as we're continuing to have conversations with legislators as they determine if this is something that they want to pick up and acknowledge within the ongoing budget process, because it is a significant undertaking.
Thanks, Harrisana. Appreciate that update. Let's pivot a little bit. We want to touch on property tax reform, which is shaping up to be a major priority. I say shaping up, it's always sort of been a major priority. But right now, particularly among House Republicans, this has the potential to come forward quickly. John, what are you hearing, and what should local officials know at this stage?
Yeah, I think that's right, Emily. It's whose priority at any given.
Always ours. Yeah.
And for our priorities, which have been longstanding around the interaction between Headley and Proposal A and its impact on property taxes, we continue to talk about it. It continues to be a part of our legislative priorities document. And I think we also all recognize that the property tax system here in the state of Michigan, while one, both restrictive, two, also isn't perfect. And I think there's been a longstanding desire to have conversations around that. So I think the positive is that there is some undercurrent happening out there about a willingness to have a conversation on property taxes and potentially reforming our system here in the state of Michigan. The challenge is all the potential political components to that, of it being an election year, the issues of affordability right now. And so there will be a concerted effort, we believe, in which to find a way in which for a system to take the cost people are paying right now and reduce those. And our objective obviously would be any conversations around cost to the individual residents don't come at the expense of services at the local level. This has really been an evolving conversation over the last few weeks, I would say, maybe even the last couple of months, as the speaker has continued to say there have been a few key priorities on his and the House Republicans' agenda, one of which Dave talked about earlier, which was the transparency part around legislative directed spending items. The other one is what Jen spoke about around economic development and figuring that. And the third has been property tax reform. And just at the end of last week, even after we had our meeting to get together and talk about this, the speaker maybe lent some more information to some of the things that he's talking about, and maybe even considering going back to the ballot for a Proposal A type scenario where you choose between A or B. Now, he didn't identify what A or B was. He mentioned that his staff has looked at about 20 different options. And the truth is, there's really only so many different things that you can do, right? Any sort of reduction in property tax payments may have to have a corresponding increase that would come with it. And just, I'm not suggesting he is suggesting any of these, but those things could include things like a sales tax increase or an income tax increase as a way to offset that. There's different components in which that they could look at, whether that be actual taxes paid to the city and village, or the fact that we have, the statewide education tax that's attached to all of our property tax bills. So you could maybe interact with either one of those two spaces. But what we know and what we've talked about as staff is that this is an issue we believe will be taken seriously in the next year. And it has both, local budget implications, but it also has the ability to have state budget implications. And by that, I mean, it can be used as a way in which to help negotiate the final outcome of the state budget. And whether that be because of some of the direct impacts, include something like the state education tax or the potential sales tax or income tax increase, or if there are just other components within it that may impact locals. So we have made it very clear that we want to be involved in this conversation. We think we have not just an important role to play into it, but really historically an important voice to lend to this based on our expertise here. And I would say one ultimately at the end of the day is a conversation that we welcome, right? And really want to engage in on understanding what the pressures are, but also understanding that stability in that space is going to be really key long term for our success and for our residents and businesses success. So looking forward to it, but details to be determined as they are in most cases in this environment, but a conversation that we fully anticipate will play out over the course of the next, 8, 10, 12 months.
Sure. Well, John, before we sort of look ahead to some of our broader priorities to 2026, I'm curious if you could walk us through because, it's December 8th, things are sort of winding down ahead of the holidays, and then, of course, we'll pick back up again. So as we think about what might happen before we all sort of leave and enjoy that time with our families, hopefully, and come back, is there anything that you can tell us about what might happen, what we should keep an eye on ahead of the holidays or sort of right when we come back and what that schedule looks like so folks know when our legislators will be in working and when they'll be on break like the rest of us.
Yeah, I think one in the short term, and Jen hit on it, is the economic development package.
Yeah,
And we should also recognize, some of the things that are happening here in Lansing that maybe historically haven't been the case. There's been some recent articles about how few public acts have been signed into law this
right,
year, 35 to date.
right.
That is the lowest number by far.
Hmm.
The fact that I think Harrison is the only person younger than 35 on this call right now. The fact that that is kind of the benchmark.
No, I'm definitely in that bucket
Yeah.
still, John. Thanks.
Sure, because years, I'll blame it on that.
Yeah,
But the fact that like we're talking about it in double digits, low double digits is amazing right now.
yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with the conversation coming out of the House Republicans wanting to tackle large issues, right?
Hmm.
So if you look at what's happened, you look at some of the earned sick time stuff early in the year, you look at the way in which the budget was handled, coupled with transportation funding, and now moving into this transparency piece, huge economic development package, and then potential property tax reform, you are finding some of the smaller things just aren't happening the way they have beforehand. I don't know that that's good, bad, or otherwise. I think it's just the observation that people are making right now. And so we don't anticipate a lot of cats and dogs happening here in the next 2 weeks as we normally would see as you wrap up a calendar year. Now, hopefully, the sunset extensions get done, and then we would anticipate next year to track much the same as it did this year.
Mm.
Governor's going to do her state of the state address probably late January, right? It just sort of varies on a couple of different things, but that tends to be the normal course of action, followed by her budget release in early February, and then they'll get working on budgets in both chambers. Now, whether that draws out past June 30 or not this coming year will yet to be seen. But I think what you will see is state of the state budget, economic development, and property tax reform sort of be the four core areas that we're focusing on in the next 2 to 3 months as we really get ourselves into it. And then you know we all wait in anticipation of what happens in elections, and
Hmm.
dictate a variety of different things as primaries shake out as we get closer to the November general. And then there are some uncertainties around what may or may not ultimately be on the ballot, should anything get the appropriate number of signatures needed to make that.
Thanks, John. Well, that is a good segue to get into some of our priorities as we look ahead to 2026. So, as we wrap up, what are we keeping an eye on for next year? What themes or early signals should local officials be aware of as we head into the new year and the second year of this legislative session? Harasana, I'll start with you.
Thanks. Well, I think John did an excellent lead up when we talk about, where we are momentum wise. I think everybody on this call can say that it has been a relatively unpredictable session as we've
Yeah.
migrated through the first year. And so, yeah, I mean, definitely looking at where we're coming from and also going towards an election year, not only is both the House and the Senate up, but also the governor is up. So priorities and legislative priorities in particular are going to be very important, but also the limited timeline in which we have to accomplish those things. So for us, my colleagues have talked about property tax, economic development, and some other issues that are in the forefront right now that already have some momentum. For us as the league, we've tried to remain consistent and also strategic in what we try to aim for as we get things done in the next year. Of course, revenue sharing trust fund is something that we're continuing to educate our members on, educate legislators on, trying to maintain that, this is a top priority for us and adjacent to probably every single one of the issues that we're advocating for. Another one is housing, right? It's a constant conversation. Our team has done an amazing job elevating the My Home program, both with engaging our members as well as bringing in supporters to the legislature and other stakeholders, from various aspects of the work we do in Michigan. And so that's something that we're going to continue to build momentum on. And it's not only us having conversations about housing, other groups, other stakeholders are as well. So there's a lot for us to distinguish, between the work that we do as local government, the work that we've already accomplished in the housing space. And so we're committed to doing that. I appreciate the question on trial court funding because that is a big issue for us as well, considering it's a significant budget undertaking. And I would say too, thinking about local services, fire services, water infrastructure, we need to start early on the budget because as we've learned, in the past year, that process can even be completely unpredictable from what we've known it to be in the past as well. And I can't leave out labor. There's some issues such as minimum staffing that have come up again, different stakeholders, different leaders in that conversation, but still a big priority for our members. And, also a lot of different issues that are still left on the table. I know our communities down in Western Wayne still care about tipping fees and the hazardous waste issue. That's legislation that's migrated through the Senate that now sits in the House. Also on the other side, rice generators for our members in the Upper Peninsula. That's something that has navigated through the House, now sits in the Senate. And just last week from Senator Singh, we saw an alternative piece of legislation. So I think it's important for us to recognize that while the momentum is different, things can change. Some issues that we may have talked about 2, 3, 4 months ago very likely may resurge back in the later part of the year because, again, conversations can be different, priorities can be different, and we've seen things move very quickly during a lame duck session, even though they might have been pretty stagnant years before. So a lot to look for.
Team, anything else to add? John, I see you're off mute.
I don't think I went on mute to begin with, so.
All right, well, that's a good thing because I got a couple follow-up questions from you that have come in through the chat. Can you comment? A member mentioned to us that they thought it was reported back in January that the House was scheduled to meet a record number of days. Can you clarify or comment on that?
Yeah, so I don't know if we've actually hit a record or not. What I can tell you is that there has been a concerted effort to be in Lansing, right? Where if you look at sort of the 2024, there were just days that they didn't come in. Now, some of that had to do with the election, so we'll see what 2026 looks like and see if they still are here the same number of days. But there were some days that there was what we would say, and the way it gets told to us is no attendance, no voting. So they still open up the board. They still have an official session day, but there's not necessarily any official action. That doesn't mean they're not working. I'm not suggesting that. Oftentimes there are committees that day. They just might not have any floor action. I don't think there's any doubt. I think all of us can attest to it on this call that they have been in Lansing more, without a doubt. And so we have had to deal with some of the ramifications of that. But I think that's a good thing for us. It's a good thing for them. It's good ways for us to work on relationship building, interact, and have spaces to talk with them. But when we talk about being in a record number of days, it's very subjective in terms of how we look at that. But they are definitely in Lansing more than they were in 2024.
Yeah, yeah. Team, is there anything else? Oh, actually, we do have one other question. John, any thoughts on Pung versus Isabel County at the U.S. Supreme Court?
So I I am not a municipal attorney, and so I'm not going to comment a ton on the case while I've just been learning about some of this recently and spent some time on the phone last week, actually, with some government finance officers, some of which are county treasurers, who are
Hmm.
paying very, very close attention to this and some of the potential ramifications that it could have on our tax system here in Michigan, quite frankly, tax systems across the country. While nobody can predict what is going to happen, but I can just assure the membership that we are well aware of what's going on, in active communication to try to understand what role we may or may not play in any sort of things that may happen there. But absolutely 100% tracking this, trying to make sure that we can do everything we can to protect our systems here in the state of Michigan, but recognize it as also a major, major issue that should the Supreme Court at the U.S. level not rule in favor of local government, could absolutely turn the tax system on its head. And so something we're watching closely.
And can anyone provide an update on the Axe My Tax movement?
Yeah, I mean, I can weigh in here. So we still don't know whether or not they're at the signature threshold. If I had to guess, the answer is probably not right now, but they do have a moving window of 180 days. So we do know that back in May, they announced they were going to start to move that window forward a little bit, which tells us they were nowhere near the amount of signatures that they needed. And then there was a lot of talk about going back and trying to like re-get those people who signed and stuff like that. What I will tell you is that that's a very difficult thing to do. If you just think about the actual physical process of gathering signatures and things like that, and people usually coming to you to sign, now they're talking about going out and trying to track all those people down and still gain additional new signatures. So they have until I believe it's July, before they would
Mhm.
have to officially submit or start to officially count from that point the 180 days worth of signatures. So they can keep moving that 180-day window until then. But as far as we are aware, they haven't reached the signature threshold of about 100, excuse me, 446,000 signatures to date.
Thanks, Dave. All right. I know Harrisana wrapped us up a little bit and we answered some additional specific questions that have come in. Team, anything else to add before we close out and as we're looking ahead at priorities in 2026?
Just, I think this is going to end up being our last live with the league for the year, unless
Mhm.
something unexpected happens in 2 weeks, and then we'll be back to tell you all about that. But just want to wish everybody a happy holidays, and thank you from our team to your communities. Appreciate all you do to help us out, and enjoy the break, get some rest and relaxation. Let's get back at it 2026.
Yeah, we're absolutely going to hit the ground running. All right, before we wrap up, a few quick reminders for everyone. The Michigan Women in Municipal Government are offering a webinar this Friday titled AI and Local Government Tools and Guidance for Responsible Use. That's again this Friday, December 12th at noon, designed to help local officials understand practical uses of AI, opportunities, and ethical considerations. Anyone is welcome to attend. We'll post the registration link here in the chat. Another big reminder, CapCon registration opens next week on the 15th. We encourage everyone to sign up early to secure your spot. You'll be joining us in Lansing in March as we cover key legislative priorities and practical tools for local officials. You can register at mml.org through your MyLeague account. We're posting some more details to that in the chat. And then, of course, a reminder that our newly elected officials training is underway for the winter cycle. We have two more virtual sessions coming up, one in January and one a little bit later in February. So if you are a new council member or if you know of a new council member, please encourage them to attend. It's one of the best ways to start their service strong with all of the info they need to hit the ground running. So you can find information in the chat as well. And then, of course, don't forget that our online learning platform is there for you 24/7, offering training you can take anytime, anywhere on courses like ethics, lobbying, and local government finance. Learn at your own pace. Again, 24/7 accessible to you. And we'll post some info to that in the chat. Thanks again for tuning in. Happy holidays to everybody. And thanks for another great year. We will see you in 2026. Have a great week.